Audio up? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our public executive session for the Board of Finance this time on the 2015 budget. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, I'm going to ask our Budget Director, Mrs. Linda Gardner, to lead us in the pledge tonight.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just a moment of silence. We had two firefighters, I guess, were killed up in Boston fighting a blaze and in the last couple of days. So just a quick moment of silence to remember them. Thank you very much. All right. So tonight, we're down to the precious 9, a few of which had noted that they would be a little bit late, but will be here. But this is our public executive session to discuss what we've heard. We've now gone through almost the entire budget presentation for the town. We do have one area that we should probably take a look at tonight in a little bit more detail, which is the revenue area. But other than that, we've gone through every department, every service, line item by line item detail. And I'd like to thank the administration, Mrs. Gardner, Caitlin, Mr. Mayor, and all the department heads for their work. I think we've achieved getting most of our follow-up items answered or additional information on, so thank you for that. I think there's still a couple of things outstanding. Mr. Tetra, there's one we should speak of. It's more of a private executive session item. But I think we've gotten pretty much everything. Caitlin or Mrs. Gardner, do you guys have anything that has not been delivered at the top of your mind right now?
The 4 items that will not be delivered by the end of this evening are the WPCA bond schedules,
Yep,
the cloud evaluation,
yep,
and the one item that may impact your budget considerations is the library fine increase evaluation.
yep.
And then the other final thing is the town clerk conveyance tax breakout, commercial versus residential.
Right, and then the other item was the contingency item.
We're doing tonight.
Okay, well,
I thought we were, right?
I don't know. Mr. Tetra hasn't said anything to me about that. So we can talk about that later. Anything else? Yes, from the Board of Ed, I think they delivered everything. I think we got a packet last week, or right before the end of right before the weekend, I think. Right? Dr. Title, you don't have anything? Okay. Anything else? Seeing nothing, why don't we go right to revenue and take a quick flip through that and see if there's any questions, comments, or concerns. Mr. Mayor, why don't I turn it over to you to walk us through kind of the revenue area?
Thank you. It's page 49 in your books, and I'm going to turn it over to the budget director, Ms. Gardner.
Whose mic?
I
Bob's.
do have a package.
Bob, can you turn your mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
No problem.
And I do have a package that goes with this. Well, I'll take one.
You don't memorize every line item?
Thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. Stone. Welcome. It's not a joint meeting, is it?
Good evening. The revenue was prepared in this finance division in accordance with our new methodology. We either have a source document that we relied upon for our estimate, a 3-year average, or a department estimate that was provided out of some unique information that we had. So to make this easier to go through, why don't we look at all of the requests that are derived from a source document. And what Caitlin just handed out to you, for the most part, are the source documents for most of the lines that fall under the source documents.
With the exception of the leases.
Yes.
Please use the mic, yeah, thank you. Okay.
All right. So, if you just look down your column, 41100, which is the general education grant, you can look at your CCM policy document that provides the governor's budget for 15 for this item. And this, in effect, is the reimbursement or the ECS grant, the special ed grant, the 75% for anything over the 4.5 times that we're required to cover. Moving on, the school transportation grant, for public school transportation, that's a small amount. Your third revenue item is for school building grants. That is contained on the second sheet in your package. Your local capital improvement program is also on the governor's budget, as is your municipal revenue share for the state, from the state. And your Pequot fund. The next item, the vet exemption, is the third document in your package. And those are the exemptions that we provide to veterans on their assessment, the state exemption, for which we are reimbursed. And to a lesser degree or a smaller amount now, we have let's see here, state-owned property. And the large amount, of course, is from payment in lieu of taxes. That's for our universities. If you want to flip to page 50, I'm going to continue with the source documents, unless you have any questions on the state grants.
No, go ahead. So
Okay.
these, well, Mr. Gardner, so these state grants, this is based on the proposed governor's budget?
Yes,
Which is the best available information?
at this time,
Right.
right?
Okay, thank you.
All right, and if you have flipped to your next page, we're going to address the parking authority, and that is per agreement. That is not in your package, but we can provide that if you wanted to check the agreement. It's a long-standing agreement that has laid out the amount. The next schedule, the next revenue item, which is dividend interest income, comes right off of our investment schedule. And then following that...
Where is that one? I'm sorry, I'm looking for
That is line object 44001. 835,000. You can just look for the amount.
What page?
I'm
We're
on
not
page
seeing-
50. I'm on page 50 in your budget book.
Yeah, 835. It's at the very top.
Oh,
of
yes, you're right, okay.
3010.
Oh, yeah,
It's a different number here
right.
than you just referenced.
I'm sorry, I might,
No, she's right, it also is 4400.
Oh, it's way over, it's the
Yeah,
fourth column.
yeah.
Okay. You're referencing the fourth column, not the first.
I'm sorry, yes.
So where are we tracking this year for dividend and interest income?
Let me get the year-to-date report.
Because we've done some significant work in this, right, Mr. Brockville?
We've talked a lot about it, we've made some headway, but, sorry, but we're still, as a committee, we're still meeting and pledging to meet with the administration, so.
We have to get another one on the calendar, right?
Yes, yeah, we really
Okay.
do, yeah. Hopefully, as soon as this budget is over, we can do that.
Okay. But I think what happened was we did change some of the investments over the last 3 years,
Right.
out of some of the more riskier things.
Some of the stuff that we were more concerned about were moved.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to ask the same question you're asking, trying to just get at the heart of the estimate.
This is working?
I don't know.
Hello. It's not working.
Tap on it.
So much for that. Hi. Yeah, we've, in the last several months, we have done a couple of things. One, and let me just back up a second. With respect to the Investment Policy Committee, you know, really, there's just one issue with mortgage-backed securities. You know, there's just discussion on that one issue as to whether or not they should be included. The rest of it is pretty much completed and done. And the committee has not had a chance to meet with the first selectman to get his input as to which way he would want to go. And there's some difference of opinion on the committee. Other than that, it's pretty much complete. In the meantime, we have also aggregated the multiple accounts. We now only have 2 accounts. One account's primarily a CD account, and one account is with a brokerage house, where we are serviced by it's Janney, and we're basically serviced by the chief investment officer of the firm, Guy LaBeouf. And part of that has provided us with, or not part of that, but one of the advantages of that, it's provided us with reports. And one report is what's called the multi-currency calendar, which basically lists all the bonds that you have, the maturity dates, the interest, the principal roll-off, et cetera, et cetera. The $835,000 is the number that comes off of that particular calendar for the fiscal year 2015. We have developed, well, not developed, they're obviously part of what the come to us with Janney. I have audited them loosely. I've not audited them in detail, but I've audited them loosely, and they seem to be accurate. The year-to-date interest income through March is $650,000.
Through March.
Well, through March 20th.
Okay. Mr. Brockville?
Okay, so a few questions for you, Mr. Mayor. One is, one of the issues that I've had with the account, and by the way, what I think makes it difficult for us to budget and for you to manage it, is that, it's funny, I can't speak to him if I can't see him. Is that in addition to the interest, obviously, that's thrown off from our quote-unquote fixed income investments, there's also a mandatory mark-to-market once a year, right?
That there is no mark-to-market budgeted. That I am not a forecaster.
Right, but one thing that I could ask you, I think, I'm talking out loud, so I apologize, but is through March 20th, we should have given the description of the report you just described, we should have a mark-to-market through March 20th.
We would have a mark-to-market through December. We mark-to-market quarterly.
We do it quarterly now, okay.
Right.
So what was the
I
mark-to-market?
don't, you saw that number, I saw that number, we delivered that number with the quarterly report. I don't remember.
I forget it, I apologize.
Yeah, but we were ahead of budget.
So let me ask the question differently then. When we budget the interest line, are we intending to budget the interest line and then the mark-to-market is a different line? Is that?
I don't forecast the mark-to-market.
Right.
That is something that would,
Where does it get recorded, though?
gets recorded on the books as a contra income, contra revenue.
I think we
in
actually
this account.
separated into a different, I think we actually asked to put it in a different.
Well, no, well, when you say, I don't understand what you're saying. I mean, it has its own account.
Right,
In
that's
past years,
that's
there
what I
was a
was
number budgeted in that account. It turns out that number that was budgeted was actually the bank fees
Right.
and wasn't really a mark-to-market number.
Well, no, that's what we asked for.
Tom, excuse me, if you,
Bank fees are an expense line
if
item.
everybody turns to page 44 quickly.
Separate, though.
Right.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor is correct. If you turn to 44, in the middle of the page, you'll see there's 3 lines. Investment
Yep.
income, which is what we're talking about now, 835.
Yep.
Contra investment income, which is the so-called mark-to-market. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bob. And then the fees, contra income bank fees. So-
Correct.
So the bank fees are relatively easy to project because they're
Yes, sir.
fairly constant, right? So I guess the only question I have Bob, is, just to be conservative, is that absolutely you nor I nor anybody here is a forecaster, and the mark-to-market can't, by definition, be predicted. But one advantage we do have is when we're making this budget up, we are quite a ways through the year.
Yeah, but we're not through any part of next
But
year.
we're not through any party next year. I just thought, I wish I'd said it as I was thinking. So,
Past performance is no
that's
guarantee.
right, that's right. Yeah, okay. So I think the truth is that, I'll just make this is a personal comment. I agree 100%, there's no way to budget it. I would also add, though, that we are somewhat responsible, though, for thinking, and I would argue that if we're keeping something in the back of our mind, we are at record low interest rates, and we have mostly fixed income investments. So if you were a betting man, you'd probably argue there's a better chance that there'd be a reduction than an increase.
Yeah, I mean, a
But
betting
th-
man...
but that- but that's not a
Yeah,
forecast.
a betting man in
Yeah.
January would have forecast bond losses year-to-date, and we actually have bond gains
Yes,
year-to-date.
no, I agree with
You
that.
know,
So, yeah, so,
But
okay.
there's basically three avenues, three venues for the Board of Finance to address that risk factor, and that is establishing the budget, reduce the number by a number, 25%, 15%, 10%, whatever number. The second part is include something in contingency, and the third part is on the final date when you set the mill rate, you can factor in risk factors.
Let me ask you,
I still want to know, how did you get to the 835, though? Because that's the question that's still on
I
the table.
thought I answered that question. I got through the 835, that is from the multi-currency calendar,
Does
which
that
was...
multi-currency calendar, which you spoke of as one of the investments, did you
No,
also
that's,
have
no, the
CD
multi-currency
investment?
calendar is a schedule of all the investments.
It's everything.
By maturity date, and the interest roll-off and principal roll-off.
It's everything.
It's
Because you
everything.
had referenced, I'm sorry, because what had confused me was you had referenced two accounts now, and now you're saying that you have one schedule that covers both accounts.
Right, the multi-currency covers everything except for a couple $1 million in CDs. And
So it
CDs
doesn't cover that,
Right, but the CDs have been added on.
but they've been added on. So if
Yes.
I go, this schedule is this is what I'm trying to get to. It's the multi-currency schedule plus what you forecast out for the CDs based on the interest rate.
Correct.
Okay.
so I guess the only, excuse me, the only question I would have, or the only concern, is, that all makes perfect sense, that's how I would do it too, is, A, it's no secret that you and I have had a slightly different opinion on the mortgage-backed securities. So that's...
Probably
that's-
other things, too.
many other things, but the mortgage-backed securities are higher yielding investments, and along with that comes some level of risk. And if we were to decide as a committee, and then obviously at the end of the day, it's the first selectman's decision, to not utilize those, then by definition, the number would have to come in less, because we'd be replacing those with lower yielding securities.
Actually, that is one bit of cushion, if you will. There is no increase, there's no interest income assigned to the reinvestment of the roll-offs.
That was my second question, okay. So that cushions a little bit, okay. I mean, it's back of the envelope stuff, but it sounds like it's pretty well done.
Any other questions on this item? Dividend and interest income. All right, let's move on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mrs. Gardner, go right ahead.
All right. And moving down that column, you're going to see your rental income and lease income divided into the various components which you have asked for in the past. We used to carry all the lease and rental income in one line, and you can see that broken down. And we have that rental schedule available if you would like to. Parking, the next are the two items from the Parking Authority, the Fairpreen rent and the Parking Authority lease, and those are again set by contract. All right.
Okay.
Now going back up to the top of the Finance Department on page 49, you're going to see those items that were set by three-year averages. And that includes filming permits, the aid to the blind, some miscellaneous items, small miscellaneous items. The surplus from discontinued funds, and that covers that. And lastly, you're going to have the department estimates, why we deviated from a 3-year average or had some other unique information. The phone access lines have been declining. And so what we chose to do was take the 13 actuals for our estimate for 15. The bank fees, which we've just discussed, are the actual bank fees, and I think that covers all the revenue items by category.
Anybody have any questions?
We got a wrench yet?
Rents? Mrs. Gardner, do you want to just walk Mr. Walsh through those really quickly?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we can,
They're all per the lease agreement.
yeah, well,
They're all per the,
They're all signed off per the lease agreements?
yes.
yes.
Well, there's definitely one here that I would have to say is not pursuant to the thing, not pursuant to the lease, because I negotiated it. It's my client, it's the Chelsea. It says $1,023 is your estimated amount for rent.
That's right.
We actually go up this year.
Okay.
So actually, it's above earlier on in page 45, you have fiscal year actual of 1650. You don't have any budget amount for fiscal year 14, probably because we were still in negotiations on it. But I don't understand why it would go down to $1,023.
Well, we are relying on the schedule, and I will check it out for you, absolutely.
Great. But all the rest have been compared to the actual leases itself? Okay. No, I mean,
That-
it would be a great thing if we were going down in the rent.
No, I know.
'Cause I could
That-
probably
that
charge for
wasn't-
being here then. This would be a great thing.
That was an estimate at the time this was prepared in conjunction with the town attorney, but I'm sure you have updated information, and we can get that for you, no problem.
Great.
Any other questions on these items? Okay, for our voting night, when we set the mill rate and all that, could we make sure we can have a detailed discussion on where we stand on the calculation of taxes to be collected, specifically the collection rate? I'd like the best available information. We talked about that a little bit. I think it'll be important. The other thing, I know it's not here, but on the bond premiums, in our debt schedules, right? I know the bond premiums are here, right? But in our debt schedules, we have the amortization of the bond. The terminology escapes me right now. You know what I'm talking about?
Amortization of the premium.
Yeah. How much is left at the end of this year on that?
I believe it's $2,100,000.
Okay, and how much are we taking in this budget on that? Remind me again.
$1,047,000 or $1,043,000.
Okay, so we still have $1 million
something like that.
left on that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. And that's what we're amortizing over the 3-year period or what have you.
$1,104,000. I've just been
Thank you.
informed.
Okay, all right. Yep, Mr. Walsh, that's not a revenue item, but I saw the bond premium thing, and I just wanted to check that out, so thank you. Mr. Walsh?
And I just want to confirm, that $1 million that would be left, you don't really want to see that account go down to zero, correct?
Well, if it
My
doesn't go to-
strategy has been to amortize it over the 3 years, but I think you were the person who made inquiry as about, well, can we use it? And the answer is, and repeating a little bit, if it goes over 3 years, Finance Department has to engage in a significant amount of tracking and bookkeeping and IRS regulations. That's why we try to use it, and do use it in less than 3 years.
But I thought we used that account for other things, other than,
No.
am I incorrect?
There's two different, you're talking about, I think, the debt service fund as
Okay.
opposed to the premium. There's two different
Okay.
numbers kind of floating around. There was the 2.9 premium that we got a few years back, but we also have a debt service fund, which is, I think, what you're referring to. I could be wrong.
And these in two different amounts, did the $2+
The only-
million go into a different account?
The only numbers that's available for reduction of interest expense is the bond premium account.
Okay, so you'd be, well, if we wanted to find a use for that $1 million, you'd be fine if we used $1 million of it.
That's what's available to be
That's
used.
available to be
That's what
used.
available, yes, it's your decision, yes, whether to amortize it over the 3-year period or use it all. That's your decision.
Okay. I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
when you say $1 million is left after what's in this budget, if
Yes,
we
sir.
decide to use more of it, $1 million of it, your department would be fine with it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
I think, can I just interrupt for a second? We got the 2.9, just so we're on the same page. We used the 320,000, I believe, in fiscal 13. I believe we used $1 million in fiscal 14, now we're using $1,115,000. I think of the 2.9, there's only $500,000 left, if I did the math right.
Can we
But
check
there's-
that?
No,
But we'll check
no.
it.
I'll tell you what, don't worry about it. You can email us the answer. Let's make sure on that number of the 2.9. And thank you, Caitlin, for reminding me of the term premium, because that's the exact term I was looking
Yeah.
for and I couldn't remember it. So, anybody else have questions on revenue line items? We're going to have the big discussion on the mill rate after the budget is complete. And then we definitely want to look more at what's going on with the collection rate at that time. Anybody else on revenue? Okay, we did go over it with department heads, going once, going twice. We're done with revenue. Okay, now, Mr. Dewitt, I guess we're not done with revenue.
Well, no, we're done. I just wanted to, from a budget committee perspective, we didn't include revenue as a separate actionable agenda item this year, and I know many members have asked me to add that back in. Do we want it to be first, or do we want it to be last, like tonight?
Let's take that up when the budget, when you deliver your
Okay,
report,
okay,
and we'll go through it that night.
okay.
Yeah.
I know we've done it first in previous years, but
Yeah.
I don't know if this was a different.
No, the reason that we broke revenue out this year, but when you do it all the first night, basically the department heads aren't here.
I don't think we need to do it all the first night. I think we need to do the general ones like this, and maybe provide more
That's kinda what
detail
I'm
and have
thinking,
better
too.
analysis. And then the ones that are specific to individual departments, we can do it at that point. What I would suggest for that, though, is that in our schedules, we note that this department has revenue associated with it, because sometimes when we're going through the process, we forget that there's also revenue. So on the schedules themselves, we should put, this department associated revenue and the expense budget. Okay?
Yes, good idea.
Good. Thanks. Anybody else? Okay. With that, we're going to open it up. This is our public executive session to just basically ask any questions we want on the budget in total, make any comments we want on this, on the budget in total. You will recall, this night was added, or many of you will recall, or some of you, this night was added a number of years ago to accommodate for the fact that there's not a lot of discussion that gets to happen at the table while we're listening to presentations regarding our overall thoughts on the budget, regarding any follow-up items, and it's our opportunity to tell each other what we're thinking of the budget that we've just spent 10 nights or whatever reviewing and hearing as we go into voting next week. The problematic way with the way we do our budget process right now, as you all recall, is that the budget that we've just reviewed is not the budget we'll be voting on. Because right before we vote, the Board of Selectmen votes and adjusts this budget. We've allowed for an extra day between their vote and our vote. So now we have, hopefully we'll get the completed schedule that tells us what the budget is as quickly as possible after the Board of Selectmen votes. It'd be fantastic if it goes quickly that evening, which is a Tuesday. Then we would have it on Wednesday, and then we vote on Thursday evening. So recall that this isn't exactly the budget that'll be before us when we vote. It's kind of a convoluted way that happens at the end. Okay? All right, so who wants to start? Any thoughts on the budget in general? Ideas, concerns, questions? Anybody? Mr. Brown? Yeah, Mr. Walsh, go right ahead.
Well, my biggest two concerns with this budget is the information we heard on the internal service fund and what direction that's going, which is it's going in a very negative direction by some things that have happened on the Board of Education side, and how to correct that, and whether we're going to correct that this budget season. And I'm a little bit, I haven't come up with my idea on how to do that, but I will be thinking about that over the weekend. But to me, it suggests that this budget may have to change in order to, I mean, this board has spent a lot of time and a lot of years and a lot of making hard decisions to make that internal service fund go in a certain direction for the credit agencies. And now we seem to be going in a reverse direction. And it's going to be something I think we all have to deal with at this table, number one. The other issue is that I see that's a negative for this budget is the fact that we have this supplemental request for school security that was presented to us as an add-on to the budget. And where's that money going to come from if we decide to fund it? Because I know personally, I will not be going up in this budget. I'm only going to be going one direction, and that's down. So in order to, if we're going to fund school security, what else are we going to cut to cover that? And how are we going to do that? And these are things I'm going to have to be working on over the weekend, take some direction from the Board of Selectmen when they have their opportunity to do it. But those are the two biggest problems.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. With that, thank you for bringing that. Mr. Mayor, you had additional information on the internal service fund on the insurance that just became available today. Why don't you just bring the board up to speed briefly on this item?
Yeah, I've only had a few moments to look at this, but very briefly,
And we need to make sure it gets circulated if it hasn't already. I know.
it has not.
Yeah.
It has not. And we haven't, these numbers need to be massaged a little bit more. These are the pure numbers, and they're, but based upon the pure numbers, based upon the data through February,
Which is the best available information.
best of information, the town budget, it's not town, but the town forecast for the actives is about $200,000 less than what was estimated in the January, with the January numbers.
So that's a good guy.
That's a good guy, which will be offset somewhat by co-insurance and that type of stuff, because it's not all ours.
On the Board of Ed side?
On the Board of Ed side, and with the Board of Ed, adjusted with the updated current trend numbers, the national trend numbers, the Board of Ed number for the, make sure I'm looking at the right one, the renewal projections is about $60,000 less than it was through February.
Another good guy.
Another good guy.
So in total, raw data, I would ask that you complete that schedule, the official schedule, as quickly as possible.
Tomorrow.
Perfect. And if we could distribute that to the board electronically. We have had an improvement of about $250,000, but that's, again, that's a one-month adjustment. So it's, you know, Mr. Mayor brought this to my attention via email at about 5 o'clock this afternoon or later.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you just said, because someone talked to me.
Okay, you brought it to my attention about 5 o'clock this afternoon or later that you had just gotten the numbers in, and to use your terminology, it's an immaterial difference from the prior months.
The town itself was a little bit better in January than what's in the budget, too, so the town's got a little bit of compound improvement.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Gardner. Mr. Brockville.
I just want to actually just carry on with Mr. Walsh a bit and I apologize, I was paying attention to the snacks while you started. So how far are we, or I guess, Mr. Mayor, the IBNR for the school side, right? How far are we from the 1x ratio, whatever it is that's desirable?
At the end of this year, if my recollection, and Doreen is here, my recollection is at the end of this year, we are at 1x, but the forecast.
I meant for the forecast for the next year. I
We're at
apologize.
That brings it down to nil.
Zero.
To zero, and it should be about,
$1.6 million.
right, I'm remembering the 2 million number, that's why
Right.
I was trying to get to it. So, Jim, could you just repeat again, I'm just wanting to put the numbers on the table for everybody. So your concern is X, and your, I'm not trying to put you on the spot yet, because you said you want to think about it over the weekend, and your remedy is.
The question is, do I just ignore this problem?
Right.
Do I ignore this forecast? Because if so, why get the forecast?
Right.
You know,
Right.
why have the forecast? Just forget about it, and we'll just say, if you're at 1x IBNR at the end of the year, you're good. So do I ignore it, or do I start planning for it?
Right, right.
And if I start planning for it, do I start,
Well, here's my question to you, not to interrupt you, is that, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying, by the way. What I find a little difficult to get my hands around is that on the town side, we have direct control over the numbers and the amounts that are reserved and what we choose to do. On the school side, we don't, or do we? We don't.
We don't, but we have an understanding
Right, that's what I'm trying to get a,
for the last several years, and I'll look at Dr. Title, who's here, who doesn't speak for the board, but he can tell me if I go astray. We have an understanding with the Board of Education that if we give them funds through the budget process to be used for their insurance, that those funds are going to be used for their insurance and not reappropriated to other things.
right.
I think there'd be a significant problem moving forward if we assign funds for that reason,
Obviously.
and we were
Right.
to find that it went to
Right.
use for different things.
Right.
So,
So, Jimmy, and again, I'm just trying to.
Sure.
Because I think the purpose of this is to explore. So are you talking in terms of adding funds to the Board of Ed budget in order to try and improve the status of their insurance reserves?
or telling them they have to reassign and increase their budget for medical insurance?
Which we really can't do.
We could tell them that. We could tell them we want this much more money assigned to medical, and you're going to have to figure out where the rest of it, how that difference in your budget.
I'm
what
not
you take away
I'm
from
not
it.
being coy, but can we do, I mean, we can't really do that, can we? I mean,
we
can talk,
can, we can
say
absolutely,
it.
I mean,
We can,
what we can't do is enforce it.
That's what I meant, we can't
We
enforce
can't
it.
enforce it this year,
Right,
but if they didn't do it,
right.
and we told them to do it, they have to come back before the body next year. I mean, let's be blatant about
Right.
it.
No, I'm trying to understand what the
Right.
intent is and what the enforcement mechanism is.
Right, and I'm not speaking for Mr. Walsh, I'm just
Right.
speaking for, I mean, and like I said, Dr. Title's here, and actually, Mr. Tetro's here, and he and I have had these conversations as
I mean,
well.
let me ask you a different question then, or to Dr. Title through you,
Yeah.
if that's
Hey,
appropriate.
feel free to talk to Dr. Title.
No, I mean, could you update us on, I mean, we met, I guess it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago when we got this report from the insurance actuaries and so forth. And have you guys talked about this, ruminated over it, had any discussions or strategies?
Well, this is the reverse of the problem we've had in the past.
Right.
Right, where the previous problem had been that Board of Ed experience had improved from the time the budget was done, and this happened last year, right? Board of Ed budgets for the number of its best available information at the time it happens. From that point forward, things can wobble around from month to month. In this case, it went downhill rather quickly. So previously, the sort of understanding was that the Board of Ed wouldn't reduce its contribution to the health insurance fund based on this new experience without running it by the town bodies. That's, I think, what, Tom, right, that's kind of what we're talking about, because that had been a problem in prior years. So that,
But we did talk about if the reverse happened.
yeah,
Because we had to play well in the sandbox.
Correct.
Because it's a combined sandbox.
exactly. And there were some, some understandings. There was an old MOU and that the town would help out if this Board of Ed got in trouble.
Right.
Because it's a self-insured volatile fund. But we've not confronted the situation that we have this year, and all the, things can change in the next 3 months too, between now and when the Board of Ed has to do its final adjustments. And And I just think we should have a meeting of the minds about it, so that nobody feels like anyone was doing anything underhanded or not in the best interests of the town. And
No, I guess what I,
it's just a conversation we need to have, because this is a bit of uncharted territory from my perspective. It's always been sort of the other way around. And last year, as experience got better, the town boards were very eager to cut the budget back, and very eager to have the board cut its budget back because it allowed you to reduce the mill rate. The consequence of that is
I think the reality on that was
This.
your budget was reduced last year, and you were allowed to pay for some of the reduction
correct.
by using your overage in the medical funds.
Well, because what had happened was we had budgeted
Right.
an enormous sum of money into the health insurance fund because the carnage had happened before the budget. If you remember, we had put $4 or $5 million extra dollars in because that was the best available information at the time. Then it changed. So, well, so I think we've always played by the rules, but this is sort of a new circumstance, so we need to just work together on it and figure out what the best course of action is, and if there needs to be adjustments, whether it's done now, whether it's done over time, how it's done.
well, let me ask,
We're open to it. I
Right.
mean, I'm open to it, but
No,
I don't have a vote.
right, let me ask you, right, and it's true, we're asking you to speak for the Board of Ed, which is.
I can't speak for the Board of Ed.
Right.
I only speak for myself.
Okay, then the question might be irrelevant, but so then I'm talking out loud. I guess
Yeah.
the question what I'm trying to get my hands around, and I'm spurred on by Mr. Walsh's question, so if you want to jump in, please do, is, has it been, in other words, you guys are asking for X dollars to run your department, right?
Yes.
At the end of the day, there's a big department and a big amount of money, and you guys have given us books with all sorts of breakdowns of how you intend to spend the money, and obviously,
Right.
you know, I assume that there's always changes and so forth, but this is generally your expectation of where the monies are going, right? One option, which I assume would not be something you'd want to do, would be to correct the IBNR by simply taking the existing request you've made or the existing request that Mr. Tetro's made and simply making cuts somewhere else. I'm not arguing to do this, I'm just talking out loud, and diverting some of that money into the fund to shore it up, right? I mean, that's one option, if I'm
It's
understanding.
an option.
Right, so I'm not telling you how to.
There's
run
other
this.
options.
No, I understand that. I'm trying to simply talk about what the options
Right.
are. Another option is for the town to say, we'll just raise the mill rate by X and throw another X dollars in and clean this thing up. And that may not be another option.
The other option is
Right.
to fix it over a couple of years.
And exactly, and the other option would be to do it gradually. Right. So I'm just trying to understand what the
Right.
playing field looks like.
And I
that's all.
will, and I have to be, I'll go on record here in speaking for Dr. Tito because he hasn't brought it up, but he has a number of times raised to me personally the idea of, hey, if you guys are so worried about it and you don't want to have this game, you know, and you're concerned over if we put it there, what's the Board of Ed going to do with it? He said, take it away. Put it all on the town side and let the town budget for it. And let the town manage it and put in what they want to put in every year for it. The problem I personally have with that was you don't get a proper accounting of the expenditures, because then that expense for all the health insurance now sits on the town side and not on the Board of Ed side, and the town side.
But it still could be broken out.
Well, it'd
Not
be
for
in kind,
reporting
like a lot of other stuff.
With another $25 million worth of stuff.
Right.
So we're just going to add, we're just.
Oh,
gonna,
yeah, well,
you know.
yeah.
It doesn't change the math, it just changes the control of that item,
Right.
right?
Well, it's-
And it changes where it's accounting for, where it's
Yeah,
accounted
but
for
you
in the
remember,
town
there's,
budgets.
you know, at the end of the year, when the accounting is done for the state, anything that's paid for by the town gets added to us, so,
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
EEO1 report that you guys do, but that's
Right.
not what the public looks at when they looks at the book
sure,
of
no,
record.
I understand.
That's not what gets covered when you say, oh my God, town side expenditures have gone up 10%, and look at this, the Board of Ed's at 2%. Well, that would be because the town's taking $25 million worth of, you know, expenses
The health insurance.
on the health insurance.
I understand.
Also, you'd have the problem over as the state has the requirement, I don't know, maybe this isn't a problem, but we've heard in the past, the state has the requirement of you continue to spend the same amount or more on education, or we cut what we give you. If you're transferring $25 million out of the Board of Ed budget and throwing it for accounting purposes over to the town side, does that impact that at all? Maybe it doesn't, but it's an extra thing to be explained.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to think about that, there's nuances to it we can work through, but if it's more of a philosophical thing or a control
Well, but
of
it's
it-
also the fact that it's
Right.
It's a $270 million budget, and you're talking
Right.
$26 million. This isn't an immaterial amount of money to be transferring from one
The
side.
same
to
thing's
the
true
other.
of pension,
Absolutely.
right? And that's another line that essentially we're given a number, and there's just a good faith agreement between the bodies.
It's a much smaller number on that
Right, no, I
side.
understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
much smaller number.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, the first selectman's budget showed, and we agreed, there's about $400,000 of savings based, that happened to occur, post our budget, which was one reason why he recommended
Yep.
the cut. I mean, that money could be shifted over into health insurance. I mean,
But,
there's options.
Yeah, and again, I just wanted to raise that because it has
No,
something
no,
that he's spoken
Dr.
about
Title's
several
been,
times.
yeah, absolutely. Let me ask a question to Mr. Mayor, though. Am I right to assume that, from a rating agency's point of view, they couldn't care less how we choose to split it up or not, so that they're interested in the IBNR as a total? Is that a fair?
Well, they're not even really interested in the IBNR. They're interested in the aggregate internal service fund
Okay.
balance,
Okay. And,
which includes
So-
medical,
Right.
general liability, workers' comp,
okay.
are the three major
But
categories.
Board of Ed Medical is a big part of that, obviously.
Yes.
So let me ask you this. Do you or Mr. Tetro or your department have an opinion on this in terms of the different ways that we've just described that one could correct this, so to speak?
No, I mean, I think ideally, my preference would be that each account functions on its own and is evaluated on its own and has a proper reserve. But as far as how it's dealt with respect to over time or immediately, and what budget you do it in, really is not material to me.
How's that conversation go with the credit agencies if we go the opposite direction? The negative balance in the internal service fund now for the first time in a number of years starts increasing.
Yeah, I think actually to quantify your earlier general comments, the negative fund balance used to be on $5 million or something like
It used to be
that.
7, actually, I thought.
Pardon?
It used to be 7.
So, right.
7
long ago,
million.
Right. And it's come down to, at the beginning of this year, i.e. 7/1/13, was $3,000,001.
Yeah.
At the end of this year, it is forecast to be $2,000,006.
Mhm.
So there's further improvement contemplated this year if we don't have like a workers' comp surprise or something like that. With the current numbers, that 2.6 at the beginning of fiscal year 14 would climb to about 4 million, so it'd be like a 1.4. That would be offset by a few $100,000. So it'd be like $1 million degradation in that account. Now, there's two things to note there.
And by the way, that's an estimate. I mean, it's,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
it's
Right.
best available information.
Right,
Yeah.
and me talking.
Right.
The one thing that plays well to the town in this regard is with the revision of the rating agencies' evaluation methodologies. They are doing less stovepipe evaluation and more holistic evaluation. So, for example, 3-4 years ago, when they looked at your internal service fund, they looked at your pension plan, and they kind of half ignored your pension plan, but they looked at each one individually. The new methodologies that Moody's S&P have all adopted look at the debt of the town, of the municipality, of the state in total. So we will get some benefit out of that because our our pension plan is better funded than absolutely most. But they will still look at it, but it just won't be as bad as it would have been. But it'll still be something that they would note.
So if we do nothing, based on your meetings with these credit agencies, we do nothing and your knowledge of the new changes, are you fine with us doing nothing? I mean, are you telling us that there will not be any type of negative outlook that you would foresee?
I don't think we would get a negative outlook, but I would not personally recommend doing nothing.
And by the way,
But I don't think you'd need to correct it all in 1 year either.
I happen to agree with Mr. Mayor on this. I do. We probably don't get a negative outlook, but going from -2.6 to -4 when we've been trying to come down, that's not something that,
Right. That's why I wouldn't let it all go, yeah.
right.
Yeah, I'd certainly do something. And have a plan to do the rest.
Right.
And do you have a plan on how you'd like us to get there as a CFO?
There's only one way to get there, and that's either two ways to get there: excellent experience or budgeting funds like the board has done in the past to improve the balance. I think, was it 2 years ago? There was like
Two or three.
$2 million
Yeah.
thrown into the workers' comp reserve.
Well, we can't control experience, right?
Correct. You can only hope.
Okay.
That was the town side, no?
The workers' comp is actually combined.
Yeah, that's right.
But we both live in the same fund.
Yeah.
Are you good?
The only other question I have in regards to the internal service fund is, I thought we were supposed to get numbers from Aon, that if new numbers showing us if we had the experience trend were equalized for both the town and the Board of Ed for this coming year.
Those new trends are incorporated in the numbers that I shared with you this evening, Mr. Walsh.
They are?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr.
So
Oh,
does that show their budget going up then? Because it should be increasing their
No,
medical costs.
they basically, they had negative, they had two positives and one negative. Maybe that's right. The negative was the trend increase. The positive is there's a month less trend, and there was some minor claims improvement. From the three of those combined, produced a net gross change of $60,000 in the estimate out of $27 million.
All set?
Yes.
Let's go to Mr. Dewitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a budget season this year, I think about the Board of Ed, and I think about starting the season talking about a deficiency in the current year budget. Now, that number 1.1 went to 7, went to 4, whatever the number is. And I know that's not this budget season and this budget discussion, but it does make me think about the volatility of the budget as a whole and how 17 children decided to come into our school system somehow, right? Much to Mr. Walsh's point, the data we get from our advisors, I struggle every year, just like Mr. Walsh said. Do we just say, bet on the come and, well, it's just experience, we can let it roll and see how it goes, or do we budget per their recommendations? I mean, we pay them for their recommendations. But we do struggle with this every year. And then, as far as the comment about the IBNR being moved out of the Board of Ed, right? I every year I think about that discussion, because we pretty much have it every year, right? It's some way. In years where there's excess cash, it's not that big a deal. When there's years like this, it becomes a bigger deal. And I think, or the discussion that always goes along with that is, well, when we ask the Board of Ed to add or delete, are they actually going to do it? And I think to myself, are we asking the Board of Ed to do something that's out of their charter? I mean, would the Board of Ed come to us and say, hey, what do you think about extending the school day an hour? No, they wouldn't. I mean, we're the financial guys, right? So I struggle with keeping that IBNR where it is or moving that out to the town side and keeping it more of under our control. The other thing that Mr. Walsh brought up that I wanted to talk about was the school safety, which I'm very much in favor of. But like Mr. Walsh, I'm also not inclined to be raising the budget. So I'm looking for cuts to offset that cost. A couple weeks ago, we were talking about school safety, might have been last week. And I think a number was thrown out, I think it may have been by Dr. Title, that $160,000 or $300,000, whatever's in your budget for that capital, school safety improvements, right, is not going to scratch the itch. It's in the ballpark of $2 million. Maybe that's long-term, maybe that's not next year. So, again, Board of Ed, we're talking about a budget, and I'm struggling with a line item there. But again, I'm very much in favor of the school security, so I think we need to figure that out. But again, as Mr. Walsh said, we have to figure out how to do it with minimizing something else. And what was my last point? Oh, big topic this year was around personnel, and more than I remember in previous years. We've talked about a new term for me this year: full-time, part-time, 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 full-time. And when I think about the Board of Selectmen voting on April 1st, and us voting on April 3rd, it seems like a very short time. I don't know why this year it feels like it's really compact. I don't know if we've had more time in the past. But one thing that I'd like to ask is, because it was very confusing to me anyway, if the Board of Selectmen does intend to add positions or make a half-time position a full-time position, could we really get detailed out what that means? Because we did talk about a full-time person half a year, then turns into an obligated position next year. So I guess what I'm really asking for is, because we have such a short amount of time, just a synopsis from a personnel level, what we're talking about. Are we talking about hiring a part-time person that we don't have to hire full-time next year, or vice versa?
Yeah, that's information that is developed between the Board of Selectmen vote and the Board of Finance vote every year, and will be again.
So, okay. And when do we think we're going to get that big data package of Board of Selectmen voted it, and here's a Excel file, or however we're going to get it? I'd like it to be an Excel file, actually. I don't know.
I had just asked earlier in the meeting that we
Oh, I'm
get that
sorry.
on
I
Tuesday
apologize
night
for being
after.
late. I probably missed it.
Yeah, I asked Mrs. Gardner, depending on how late the Board of Selectmen meeting goes next Tuesday night, that we get it as soon as possible following that
Okay.
meeting. Preferably that evening, because again, we vote on Thursday.
We have a very short amount of time, right?
But if she can't get it to us that evening, it'll-
Linda's not looking like,
We pulled an all-nighter last year. We're going to try not to do that.
good.
okay. All right, that's it for me. Thank you.
Rent a cot. Yeah. After they deliver the schedule. We'll go to Mrs. Albin.
I wish that the meeting we're having tonight, we were having after the Board of Selectmen were to
Agreed.
vote on the budget, because I think it makes the discussion that we have this evening potentially moot by the time we get to next week, Wednesday, and know what their action has been. I can talk about pieces of this budget that I might consider, but I just don't know what's happening at their meeting. So I'll be interested in seeing their information. I am not interested in seeing this budget go up.
I'm sorry, you're not interested? Is that
I'm
what-
not interested in seeing that happen. But to speak to any of the items that are sort of on the cusp is just too difficult until we know what the Board of Selectmen have done.
Thank you, Mrs. Albin. Mr. Stone?
This is actually for Dr. Title, if he could answer these, or explain. The low enrollment sections, in other words, introduction to pottery is 2 people, interior design is 3, marine biology is 5, AP Latin is 6, Call the Wild is 7. You know, some of the video production is 5, fashion textiles is 5. Can you explain what these are costing us?
Not off the top of my head.
Well, I don't mean that,
Right.
it's just, they're very small classes, so are these teachers that are teaching them not teaching something else, or, it just seems like it's kind of, to me, to have like an introduction to pottery class with 2 people in it, doesn't make sense.
Right, well, a lot of times, as we've said in here, these classes start out with more kids, and a variety of things happen, and we have a couple sections, and classes get unbalanced for a variety of reasons. But every teacher, as a general rule, teaches 5 classes. All right, so a full-time teacher teaches 5 classes with 2 exceptions. English teaches 4, and science teaches 4. But there's also some corresponding sections that are very large. We've got classes that are over 24. We've got classes that are over 28. So when you balance it all out, 1,200 sections of classes being taught, on average, we're 18, 19 kids in a class at the high school. High school scheduling is not perfect. It's not an exact science. Ideally, we wouldn't want to offer a section of 5 or 6. We don't ever aim to do that. We wouldn't schedule it that way. But the quirks of high school scheduling are difficult to predict. Sometimes we do want to offer classes like AP Latin with 6 kids because it's the culminating course in a sequence, and maybe that started with 12 and some kids dropped it or their schedules changed. This happens from time to time in high schools, and we have to make decisions in April and May for what we're going to offer. Some things do get cut. I go through this with the high school headmasters every year. If the enrollment isn't there, we don't offer the course. But we do get some quirks, and we do our best, but we're not perfect.
But for instance, I don't know why I'm picking on pottery, but anyway.
Right.
With 2 kids, yeah, I know. With,
Right.
with 2 kids in it, why isn't the class just canceled?
Well, if we only had 2 kids who wanted to take it,
Yeah.
the class would not be offered,
Right.
right? So
You had more
obviously,
requests and they didn't take it.
there were requests, or the schedules are done and the kids start out and something happens where they have to switch a class, all right? So somewhere in the kids' schedule, they say, I'm in English 41, I'm really struggling, I need to switch to English 42, which is the lower level of the same course. Well, the English 42 class, the only way to get that in their schedule might be meeting at the same time as pottery. So guess what? More important for the kid to be in the right English class, so they drop pottery, they pick up something else, and pottery starts dropping. Pottery is an unusual one because there's only like 8 pottery wheels. So you're never going to have a lot of kids in there to begin with. That's kind of the max. So that's a very unusual, specialized course that is very beneficial. But, if you want to start chopping electives off at the high school, I think you're going to be doing, some damage to the quality of our high school program. I will tell you, we do our best to avoid these things, but it is a very complex arrangement. Kids take a lot of classes. A lot of kids are taking 8 out of 8. So they drop one thing, something else has to go. And so the kids are all going to go somewhere. They're going to take something else. So if we wiped out a bunch of these, they'd go somewhere else. We'd have to add teachers in another place.
Maybe not.
So yeah, and it's also a function, not to bring up this sore subject, it's a function of having 2 high schools instead of 1.
I agree.
Right? Okay? We're not going to unwind that probably in the near future. So it is, there are some trade-offs to having that, and we do our best to not offer classes that have really low enrollment, but sometimes it's unavoidable. You have 2 sections. You have 32 kids who want a class. So you set it up and you have 2 sections, and one has 14 and one has 18. And then the next thing you know, 3 or 4 kids don't come, 3 or 4 kids move, and now one class has 9 and one class has 20. And so we show up with a class of 9. How could that happen? Well, because the other class is bigger, so that's where I think you have to look at the whole picture, which is why we put at the bottom that, look at the number of classes we have that are also very, very large.
No, I know.
So it's why we kind of look at this in the aggregate. We don't just run classes because we happen to have a teacher to teach them. If we get, like, when we do sectioning right now, if we don't have enough kids signed up to offer a class or classes, we cut the positions. We might do that every year. At the same time, we might have overages somewhere else, and we need to add. So we might subtract .4 of an art teacher, but we might need to add .4 of a business teacher if the enrollments, justify that. But once the school year starts in September, we're not going to unwind that. Once the schedule's set and going, we got to go. So,
Dr. Tuttle, can I have, what system do you use? And I don't want to go into this for 20 minutes or anything, but since it came up, people have come to me with this question from the general public, and I shared it with you. Once you come up with, how do you come up with the number of students that you think are going to take a specific class?
right,
You're
so all the kids fill out, actually, most of it's now done online through the computer. It used to be done on paper with cards.
Right.
But since we moved to Infinite Campus, we've made it more, computer-based. All the kids put in, and we get the requests.
Right.
And we are, this year, and we've tried in previous years, but this year we have actually better data, anyone who tells us they're not coming, we remove them from the system.
You do that?
We do that.
That was my question, because I know that kids who are going to private school
Right.
are forced to fill out these cards.
There were some misunderstandings around that, but if they filled out a card, a virtual card.
A virtual
and
card.
said, I'm planning to go to Fairfield Prep next year, we're not scheduling them. And we are, in fact, it says right on the form, by writing this, if you subsequently change your mind, it may be difficult for you to get the courses you want because we're going to schedule based on kids who say they're going to be here.
Right.
So we're going to have and both high schools are doing that the same this year. But that could be a kid from 9th to 10th who tells us they're not coming back, or a kid from 10th to 11th. But we always have an influx of kids who come to us over the summer. It's not a one-way out. Sure. And we have kids who come back to us from private schools. So we have kids who come back to us from private school in 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade.
It's not an exact science, but what I wanted
Right.
to know, because people have approached me
Right.
about it.
We don't schedule kids who say they're going to leave us.
Fair
Is the short version answer to that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions on this? Mr. Stone, that's it from you? Mr. Becker, did you have your hand up?
Not for this, but in general.
Okay, no, just in general, I think. Thank you, Dr. Tuttle.
Stay.
In general.
Don't go too far.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I mean, just my thoughts. I think that as it stands, where the budget is too high. I don't know if it necessarily has to go down drastically, but I think where it is still too high. For me, this is my 5th budget, and I don't know if this maybe before that had ever been done, but I'm a little concerned at the way that the school security came in afterwards, because we have a lot of variables that happen in these budgets, and there's usually some sort of component added in to kind of guard against that so that there aren't big swings. And I think to do the school security, which in large part I'm in favor of trying to figure out what we can do, it's going to require us, to make, to basically bring that budget up, and in order to then go back down to even where we are, where most people think, the budget even sits right now, it's going to require reductions, and then to go even further is going to cause more problems. Mr. Walsh brought up, and I think a number of people here, other members have certainly, alluded to concerns about the internal service fund. I don't necessarily know if we have to fully restore that, and I think with Mr. Mayor's numbers, we can kind of get a better look at that overall, which is what we've looked at for a long time. But it's concerning because if we don't do anything about it, I think we set ourselves on a bad track. And so I think over the next couple of days, and then seeing what the Board of Selectmen do, I agree from a timing. I'm not sure if there's a great way to improve it, but I agree with Mrs. Albin about the timing of this meeting. It's a point for us right after the process to bring things up, and any other concerns we have, which you'd want to have a couple days before we voted. But it's tough because without seeing the Board of Selectmen, we really don't know what's presented to us. And in the past, they've done a lot of adjustments, and then we've done a lot. So we're going to have to, probably, a lot on our own, I think, probably to try to figure that out and watch what they do, and then there may be some discussion before we vote, depending upon it, because I think there's a lot of moving parts this year.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Anybody else? Mr. Brown?
On the on the budget, and again, this is very general, because we're not going to get specific tonight, right? But when I look at the budget and think about the budget, it's the same thoughts I had from last year's budget, and I'm sure the budget the year before. So, what do we think about? We think about, as a Board of Finance, our obligation to continue to secure the AAA credit rating, which includes the Internal Service Fund. We're going to fund the ARC, the pension, right? We're going to fund the other post-employment benefits. We're going to take a look at the fund balance, and we're going to make sure that that's secured too, so we don't have any issues with the rating agencies. And then, on page 32 of this book are the cost drivers, which are very similar to the years before, which really center on salaries and benefits, just like in any private industry. That's where the costs are, right? There's no difference. We have our contracts, and that's the biggest cost driver of this budget, which then leads to the tax burden. So we think about the tax burden, the percentage of increase versus services that we receive and the value. And then we look at, for me, I look at the options. What are our options? And how else can we provide these services? So just again, in general terms, it's the obligations we have, it's the cost drivers, it's the tax burden, which I agree won't go up from where it is now. If anything, it's going to go down. And then the services. And those are really what the decisions we have to make as a town. And we're getting a lot of advice, thoughts and opinions in our email box, which I do appreciate, because it gives us a feel for where the town stands, at least the people that are paying attention and are interested, and they give us our feedback. I think Saturday could be an interesting day, and we'll see where that goes. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Seeing no one else, I'll take last shot here. A couple things. Number one, I want to address something that Mr. Dewitt said, because I think he said it quite well when he talked about the IBNR and really the insurance fund. And Mr. Mayor put out his prescription saying, hey, I don't think you can do nothing. And as I indicated, I agree with that. I agree with it for maybe a different reason than some others. Not so much for the AAA credit rating, because I don't think we'll get a negative outlook if we don't address it right now. But I think we'll continue to have this conversation if we don't. Because the reason we have this conversation annually, as you correctly point out, is because there's not enough in the reserve. And we're on the razor's edge. And until we build up that reserve enough as a well self-insured entity, we're going to have this struggle of managing it with late-breaking information, both positively and negatively. And as much as we're reactionary to that, we perpetuate that being a problem going forward. Whereas if it was funded appropriately and well, the vagaries of a month here or a month there wouldn't matter to anybody, and you'd be on a nice, stable course, whatever that was. Might not be the course you want of increased cost, but you would at least not have to wait for this, what's going to happen in February, what's going to happen. So that's why I think we need to continue to address it and drive that negative number in a different direction, as we have been doing the last few years. Other than that, I think many of the other items have been brought up, the school security issue that I think many of us can support, some of the other initiatives in here. But what it comes down to is this, something that I've been speaking about for a number of years, and I'll raise it again, and that's strategic planning. The bottom line is we're at a point in our life cycle as a financial entity where, in order to control these tax increases, at least in the short term, you're going to have to change the way you do business. You're going to have to change the services that you provide or the way in which you provide them. As we sit here, our obligation is the AAA credit rating, is to appropriately fund the contracts that we don't vote on but are obligated to fund, is to appropriately fund our long-term obligations, not just because of the AAA credit rating, but because they represent promises largely to employees and past employees, and we have a moral obligation, and also the cost drivers of this budget, which are in place because of the services we provide and the way in which we provide them. And until we address that, and that doesn't get done in a budget cycle, that gets done before a budget cycle, you're going to continue to have these types of tax increases or proposed tax increases. And it's really a town-wide discussion that has to happen. And our elected representatives, largely by charter in the Selectman's office, as well as the RTM, need to discuss what services they want to continue to provide and how we can best provide those. And our job is, given that list of services, can we afford to provide them? Are we providing them in the best manner we possibly can? Are we living up to our obligations to fund them based on the contracts? And it does get increasingly frustrating when this work is done year after year, but yet we still have increases because of these items. And let's be clear as well. One of the largest drivers of this is our long-term obligations due to our contracts with our employees. We live in a binding arbitration state. No adjustments to those contracts are going to be done overnight. No adjustments to those contracts are going to be easy. No adjustments to those contracts are going to take place immediately. And if you start addressing the long-term obligations, we've seen statistical work that says, for example, a lot of people want to go to a 401k style plan, which over time, there's a lot of benefits to that in terms of the certainty of what it's going to cost, getting away from the vagaries of the marketplace, getting away from the actuarial studies that need to be done every year. But for the first 7 or 8 years, there's no savings. In fact, it's more expensive because you're going to be funding the plans that are already in place as well as putting into the new plans. Right? Yep. So although that's a good long-term fix, perhaps, from a financial perspective for the town, in the short term, that doesn't provide any tax savings for the town. So that's not the magic bullet in that. So it's a lot to contemplate, but I think it's very important things that we need to discuss and very important things that the rest of the town bodies have before them. But I can't argue enough that we need that strategic planning process, and we need those discussions to take place before the annual budget cycle. And those are my thoughts as we head into the budget. With that, does anybody on the board have anything else to say? Seeing none, I can't believe this.
Is Mr. Bolito here?
Yes, exactly.
Only in spirit.
Can I before we leave, 2 things. I'd like to thank the administration for all their hard work. I'd like to thank our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen for being good partners in this process. I wish them well in their budget vote. I'd like to thank the finance team on both the Board of Education side as well as the town side, not only for their preparation for the budget cycle, but also for your good-naturedness and following up on our responses and our requests for information, which were voluminous. I'd like to thank our board clerk, Caitlin, for helping us, keeping us in line, keeping me in line, and keeping the process moving fairly and smoothly. I'd like to thank the public for being involved in the process. And lastly, I'd like to remind everybody Saturday morning, 9:30 at Ludlow Middle School. We have our open forum where we do want to hear from the public. And as Mr. Brown said, we've been getting literally hundreds of emails from various constituencies, some extremely passionate, some too passionate. And I hope that we can maintain a decorum and a good sense of discussion on Saturday morning. With that in mind, I expect it to be a rather well-attended event. And the ground rules we're going to try to do is we're going to try to keep it to 2 hours of public comment. That seems to be fair. So 9:30 to 11:30, if it goes that far, with maybe a half hour, 20 minutes for us to kind of wrap up as we do. Depending on the size of the crowd, we will definitely have a time limit. I've asked Mr. Walsh to bring his iPad. That seemed to work efficiently last year. We're going to start out, depending on the size of the crowd, maybe with a minute and a half, and then maybe a minute for comments. We do like to hear from everybody. We do try to keep it pretty informal. We do try to take everything under advisement, and we appreciate everybody's diligence in the process. With that, anything else to add, Mr. Brockfield?
I'd just like to just say one thing. Two thank yous that you missed, although you did a very good job thanking.
Okay.
One is thank you for doing an excellent job as chairman.
Thank you.
And two is thank you to Jerry for doing an excellent job of filming these hearings and letting the public have the opportunity to see these hearings, those who can't make it to the meetings.
Right. Thank you very much.
Sucking up for camera time.
Exactly. So do I have a motion?
It always helps.
We'll go to Mr. Dewitt. Do I have a second? We're going to go to Mr. Brockfeld. All in favor of adjournment? Postponed. See everybody on, opposed, I meant. See everybody on Saturday morning. Thank you.